I'm Jim Wolfreys. I'm president of the UCU branch at King's. I just want to say a couple of things about what I thought was a magnificent day yesterday. The thousands of people on the streets in London and Manchester that proved that trade unions, student organisations, the NUS, the grassroots student organisations can work together and put out significant numbers of people on the streets in the same kind of lively, irreverent, confident demonstrations that we saw before Christmas. And I think I was on the London demonstration. I thought it was magnificent the way that we marched past Millbank. I'm sure the police, who surprisingly had left Millbank unguarded again, were expecting there to be some kind of kerfuffle there. The fact that we marched past there and went to the Egyptian embassy to show solidarity with what's been happening in Egypt was fantastic. And I think that the message to the government is that these protests aren't going away. This movement is here to stay and is growing stronger. And the presence of trade unionists on that demonstration made it harder for the police to attack the demonstration, as they did on December the 9th. But of course, between December the 9th and the 29th of January, there'd been a big interruption. So that demonstration yesterday was important to get the movement back on the map in the run-up to the ballads that Ruby mentioned, but also for the 26th of March demonstration. A number of events happened during that interruption. There was a revolution in Tunisia. There's a revolution underway in Egypt. George Osborne had an £11,000 skiing holiday. Ben Brown, people may remember Ben Brown. He's an embedded reporter with the police for the BBC on demonstrations. He must be alarmed at the scenes in Egypt. He must have sat in frustration and wondered where was the condemnation for the people throwing lumps of rock at police in Egypt? Where was the condemnation of the disgraceful scenes of them rocking a van on the streets? There are even reports that people in Egypt were rolling their wheelchairs towards the police. There's obviously a much deeper problem with the police that surfaced over the Christmas period, which is so unpopular the way that they're becoming, that they're actually finding it extremely difficult to procreate. And at great expense, they are disguising themselves as protesters because it's actually impossible for police officers to find any kind of partner dressed up in uniform. And they've been given license at taxpayers' expense to go and procreate with protesters to the extent that it is actually more expensive now for the police to reproduce than for pandas to reproduce. But of course the other reason for the police not attacking the demonstration yesterday is because for them to wade in to demonstrators at the Egyptian embassy would have invited comparisons between their style of policing and the style of policing of Mubarak's police force. I'll say something about Egypt again in a moment, but one of the most telling comments about those protests, I thought, was made by a journalist on Al Jazeera when he said, fundamentally what's at stake here is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and that is what is at the root of the crisis. I think there are very similar themes to what's happening in Egypt, to what's happening across the rest of the world, including in Britain. These are the effects of a neoliberal offensive against the majority of the population worldwide. What we've seen over the past few weeks are protests that have put the British government on the defensive, that have completely discredited individuals like Vince Cable, who is now a figure of fun, probably even to himself when he looks in the mirror. But much as that government has been discredited, much as the idea that austerity is somehow inevitable has been discredited, we now have to take the fight to the people actually implementing their cuts. We have to take the fight to the council leaders who are going to implement these cuts, to the vice-chancellors who are going to implement cuts, to managers everywhere who are following the agenda of this government that has an austerity programme without a mandate. I want to say something about vice-chancellors because these are a group of people who collectively, their average salary is more than than the Prime Minister's salary. They earn on average £250,000 a year. And in universities up and down the country, these people are sitting in rooms deciding at what level they are going to make students pay for a crisis which they didn't create. Are they going to double fees? Are they going to treble fees? 18 Vice-Chancellors wrote to the Daily Telegraph urging MPs to make students pay twice or triple the fees they're already paying. For these people on salaries of over £250,000 a year to demand that students have their fees trebled to pay for an austerity crisis that wasn't the making of students is absolutely grotesque. It's not just the students they're taking it out on, they're also taking it out on staff in universities and FE colleges. They're attacking our pensions, effectively stealing money from our pensions. They're attacking our wages, effectively asking us to take significant wage cuts. All of this because they want to make it cheaper to sack people. They will offer no job protection for lecturers and college workers in the present period. So we will be balloting over the next few weeks for strike action in defence of our jobs, in defence of our pensions, in defence of our pay and conditions. This is part of a broader fight in defence of education, and student support is going to be absolutely crucial in that fight. At King's last year, we had a strike. Staff were boosted by the support they got from students who put up signs saying we support our teachers, and it made the strike, helped make the strike a successful strike. But we need more than university and college workers involved in this fight. We need council workers, railway workers, tube workers, postal workers, civil servants, teachers, everybody who is facing these attacks to join together, whether we call it coordinated action or a general strike. We know from what's happening in Tunisia, what's happened in Egypt, that when we show our power in the streets and in our workplaces and exert that power, no government can stand in the way of that. And I think that's a very important thing for us to remember. We can actually win this. We can defeat this government and we can see off these attacks. The last thing I want to say is about this question of rich and poor. The government wants to make £81 billion worth of cuts to the private sector. In 2009, the 1,000 richest people in Britain saw their wealth increase by 30%. The total amount that their wealth increased by in that year was £77 billion. So you couldn't get a more graphic illustration of taking money from the poor and giving it to the rich. They took £77 billion, they're taking £81 billion off us. But of course it's much more than that. It's an ideological assault on the public sector. They want to destroy collective sense of public ownership of our services and delivery of those services. Our most powerful weapon in this context is unity, and we have to resist all the attempts to divide students from trade unionists and all the other attempts that they're making to divide us. Because our greatest weapon is the collective power that we have standing together in strike action, in the occupations that we've seen, in the demonstrations that we've seen. The 29th of January was a fantastic marker that we've put down for the weeks of struggle that we're going to see, that will include the ballots in the universities and the colleges, and also the 26th of March demonstration that we have to make our day of anger against this government.